advocate. Become a voice for those who have been silenced. As you identify ways to live out Isaiah 58 in your own life, may it involve shining your light in a dark place. Together, let's eradicate exploitation.
Child Impact International. So, do you want to turn the lights back on, Sean, and we'll spare everything else? I got the Zoom going, so whenever if he feels like jumping in, we see that go off. All right, we have Brother Steve's in the hospital. Pray for healing.
My mom, or you're not in the hospital, the nursing home, but you had a broken collarbone.
Oh, really? Did she fail?
Yeah. So
I spell it right.
there's no PORO engagement. Or
Okay. Gina?
Jill, her husband Alan, and their son Zach all need healing. But they also need prayer protection, as Satan's attacking them big time of Turkey.
Right, I can imagine.
Oh,
The devil hates it whenever we reach out and people start seeing these truths that we're sharing with them, you know. When the light comes on, the devil attacks, right? Sister, I think you have your hand.
our friend Rudy fell off,
Ooh,
punctured his diaphragm with a broken rib. It was a serious condition.
oh,
I think it's not.
oh,
Also,
Yeah.
let's remember Melissa, still strength from Manila.
and this is Melissa Stevens and kids. Are they healed?
Their eyes are getting better.
Okay, good. So that she's supposed to find out Monday about the plane tickets, is that right?
They think they have some tickets that are, yeah, Monday will be the final.
Rhonda?
Martin woke up 6:20, so it's just a sick. And my brother's mom, name is Judy, has just been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and she's in a lot of pain. And so, her last name is Spencer. Judy, so she has a lot of pain, and my brothers are really struggling with it. They're quite angry with us.
Really? That's hard.
They've never been Christian, and it just makes life worse for them.
SPENCER.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Yeah.
My coworker Candice, she was diagnosed last week with cancer.
Why? On the end?
Right.
Okay.
And Consuelo's daughter, and she's in the hospital right now.
Really?
So she's actually in prayer.
What's her name?
Marangeli,
All right, I'm ready to write.
MARADELIE.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's see. I think did anybody else have their hand up? I know, we got Thomas. Okay, and we'll come around the table here.
My sister for conversion and my parents for this.
Okay. Am I spelling her dad's name right?
Right.
Yeah. But Jonathan has A in.
Okay. I think Wanda, you want me to put Monty, Les, Don, Richard, and Sandra, right?
Correct.
Excellent. Okay, Don.
A special prayers to Candace to help us to understand God's word and. You know, the anger thing, everything's happening with our family, it is. We want. Oh, for.
Yeah. So when is Candace gonna come visit us from Arkansas? Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so did I spell Candace right?
No, but it's all right.
I want to get it right now. Let me get. What is it again, Ken?
The US.
The US, okay, like this, okay. And so, okay. All right, Zach,
My coworker's name is Candy. It's ICE, Candy,
this is Candace Day.
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm learning how to spell every way you can do it, right? All right, sister.
He was right. Believes it. And I just want to have the right words so as we talk all the way around.
What's his first name?
Dan, D-A-N, Dan Power. I just want to be able to present God to him in a way that he will be open to.
Okay,
I've got a good verse, but that's our praises.
all right.
Psalms 86:7. Day of my trouble, I will call upon thee, and thou wilt answer my. That's it. Shall answer it.
You know, it's a great verse because, 86:5 starts out, for you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive and abundant mercy to all those who call upon you, right? And then as you go through, read it from 5. Read it from 5 to 8. Will you read it from 5 to 8, Robert?
Verse 5.
5 to 8.
Okay, for thou, Lord, art good and ready to forgive and cleanse and mercy unto all of them that call upon thee. Give ear unto my prayer and attend to the voice of my supplication. In the day of my trouble, I will call upon thee, for thou wilt answer me.
Isn't that good?
Yeah, that's what Christ spoke.
I think it's an awesome passage. Yeah, I highly recommend that we have that memorized and claim it because it's an important passage. Bill, why don't you pray for us?
Heavenly Father, thanks to this beautiful Sabbath day, sunshine, that we call on you and you will hear us, you'll answer us. Remember lots of people for healing, some even in the hospital, for Steve, Dorothy, Rudy, Martin and Judy Spencer, for Candace, Margalie. Also, Claudia Les, Stan, Richard, Sandra, and so you'll help each one of those in the way that you know is best. Michelle, Allen, and Zach. Thank God's protection for them. And also you and Melissa, Stephen, kids over there. Hopefully they'll be well enough that everyone's will let them fly and they will be home very soon. And you'll also continue to do with Melissa for conversion with Mr. Don Pettis, they're dealing with that. Candace is helping understanding and leading their lives. So Dan, and he'll be open to truth that he was taught as a child, I'm sure he knows, presented in a way that will maybe get his mind thinking about that again. He'll be with us, bless us today, and also as you heard earlier about all the millions of children that are out there that are being cruelly mistreated, and it's gonna make a difference in their lives too. And that
All right, we're in. Somebody gotta take a picture of this. You gotta build on that. Revelation chapter 6. We've been going through these seals. And we made it through 5. And I want us to notice before we jump into the 6th seal. If we look at 1 through 5, they're very symbolic, right? You've got death riding on a horse, or with hell or Hades following behind. I mean, these are very symbolic passages. And it's interesting to me that when we get into seal 6, it's not symbolic at all. It's literal. So it changes. 1 through 5 is symbolic and is representing the church all down through the ages, from the time of Christ all the way down to our time. And then in 6, we have something very literal. I think it's implying that there's a change. You know, at the end of time, we're starting to understand what these Bible prophecies really mean, and it helps us get ready for the second coming. Notice what it says there in Daniel chapter 12, because Daniel was given a lot of information that covers the span of history all the way down to the second coming. And here in Daniel chapter 12, we've got an interesting statement that's made. Daniel's interacting with these holy ones, and he's told in verse 4, but you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Right? So there's this idea from the word of God that we're going to have some better enlightenment here at the end of time, so that we can understand what's going to take place, the very last events, and get ready for the second coming. And so I think that's why we had this transition. Seals 1 to 5, very highly symbolic. Seal 6 is very literal. So we have this transition taking place. So let's read the first part of this seal, Revelation chapter 6. And we're going to start there in verse 12. And let's go to, let's see. Let's just do 12 and 13 and stop there for now.
And I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as a sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind.
So there's a lot of information in the Old Testament and in the Gospels that sounds very similar to this. So let's look at some of these passages here. And I think I'd like to start with Joel chapter 2, verse 10. And then we'll jump to Joel chapter 2, verse 31. And let's notice the similarities between what we see here in the 6th seal. We see an earthquake. We see the sun being blackened. We see the moon becoming like blood. We see the stars falling. So we have these physical things happening in outer space and in our atmosphere and on this earth. So in Joel chapter 2, verse 10, notice what it says. So we got Daniel, Hosea, Joel, right? Joel chapter 2, verse 10.
The earth shall shake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining.
Sounds similar? Right? What's verse 31 say?
Sun will be turned to dark, and into blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord.
So we're talking about events that are supposed to be happening right before the second coming, right? Isn't this the context we just read in Joel chapter 2? So we have this idea of these events taking place, in a way, kind of wakening up the world to prepare for the second coming of Jesus. Now, this is pretty fascinating. Notice Isaiah chapter 13. We see a very similar thing in other passages in the Old Testament. Isaiah chapter 13, and I think the main verse is verse 10.
For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine.
Very similar, right? How about Amos chapter 5? Notice what it says. Let's look at verse 8. Amos is just the next book over from Joel, chapter 5, verse 8.
Him that made 7 stars in Orion, and turneth the shadow of death into the morning, and maketh the day dark with the night, that calleth waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. Lord is his name.
So the part that jumped out to me was, and makes the day dark as night, in that particular verse. Notice Amos chapter 8, verse 9.
And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord God, that I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the third day.
What's interesting to me too is the verse before, in verse 8, it says, the land shall the land not tremble for this, and everyone mourn who dwells in it, and all of it shall swell like the river, heave and subside like the river of Egypt. It reminds me of earthquake. Is it not describing like an earthquake there in verse 8? So we have this idea of earthquake, and then we have this idea of things happening with the sun and the moon taking place. And this is an Old Testament teaching, isn't it? That this is going to be taking place before the second coming. So now let's go to the New Testament and see what it says about that. So I'd like to go to Matthew chapter 24, and I think it's verse 29 that we want to look at there.
Immediately after the stress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and not going to flood. The earth will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken.
It's interesting. You have distress. Is that what word it used?
Yes, immediately after the distress of those days.
What word does it use in 21 of that same chapter? Yeah.
Great
For there will
tribulation.
be great distress, unequal, at
Yeah.
the beginning of the world until now, never will be that.
Yeah, so it's interesting how they're using the word distress instead of the word tribulation, because if you use the word tribulation, then this idea of a 7-year tribulation at the end of time doesn't work. So they use the word distress there instead of the word tribulation. Did y'all notice that? Everybody else's translation, do you guys have distress? Or do you have what do you have, Gina?
KJV.
And what word is it?
Tribulation.
Okay. Who has New King James? As tribulation. Okay. Anybody else? Any other translations that you see? Is there another type word they use there? See, if you use the word tribulation, which I think is the correct translation there, because then you do away with this idea of a 7-year tribulation. And we'll show that here in just a minute, because I want to come back to that. Okay. Let's look at Mark chapter 13. So the parallel chapter, Mark was written before Matthew. And so the parallel chapter, so let me back up just a little bit. So Mark was written, and then Matthew and Luke were written based upon Mark, his gospel, okay? You notice Mark's gospel is the shortest. So he wrote his, and then Matthew and Mark kind of paralleled their gospels on the kind of the layout of what Mark did in his, you see. Yeah, I think so. I think you have Peter and Mark talking about this, and Mark writes it down, and then you have Matthew and Luke, after they're reading Mark's gospel, they write their own accounts and they parallel that. So we call Matthew, Mark, and Luke synoptic gospels. If you notice, John's gospel is totally different. It's written totally different than those three gospels. And so we call those three synoptic because they really parallel each other. So notice in Mark chapter 13, you have a parallel chapter to Matthew chapter 24. And we could see there in Mark chapter 13, we have some interesting things there as well. Notice in verse 24.
But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light.
And do verse 25.
And the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken.
So it sounds very similar to what we read in Joel and Isaiah and Amos, and of course in the sixth seal in Revelation chapter 6. Does it use the word tribulation or distress there? Okay, so they're pretty consistent in calling it distress. So instead of the word tribulation there. Which one?
New Living Translation.
Okay. I know they call it NLT, right? New Living Translation, right? And so what's interesting, it's really a paraphrase, but they call it a translation. I don't like that, when you look at the continuum, this idea of Bible translations in the continuum, right? You've got this idea of a formal translation on this side of this continuum and a paraphrase on this side. And so on this side, on the formal, you have the King James, the New King James, the New American Standard. You have those type of Bibles, okay? This one is probably written it's written probably with the highest level of education in mind in terms of the other ones, right? The way that they translated the New American Standard. Even though there's some passages here that they use some of the same text that the NIV used, and that's why I don't necessarily like using that one. Not that they didn't do a good job of translating, but they used some of the older codices that weren't being used by the early church. And some of the passages are, specifically Revelation 22:14, they say here, wash the robes instead of do their commandments. Okay. And so that's why that's why I like to focus on those two right there. I think there's not a perfect translation, but they're awfully close, right? In terms of translating from the original copies. So as we go forward down through here, I'd put the NIV kind of in here, and I'd put the New Living Translation kind of there as we go toward this idea of paraphrase. And I think a good paraphrase that we would use on this side. Steve, can you hear me okay? Thumbs up. I'm hoping that you can hear me. I'm assuming he'll let me know if he can't hear me, right? Okay. So on this side, what is the popular Adventist paraphrase? Clear word, right? That's obviously a paraphrase, and it uses a lot of Ellen White's thoughts and ideas and some of the passages there. So we, in our Bible study, you kind of want to stay more on this end on the study. Sometimes the NIV gets it right, and that's why it's okay to kind of delve in and look at these other ones, what they're saying about this text, But I think a lot of the time, maybe we stay closer to this side of the, I call it the continuum that we have here of Bible translations, right? Yeah. It's over here. The NASB, I don't want to put the new, I'll put the revised standard. It's over there too. Yeah. Okay. So we'll see the importance of this word distress or anguish that Yah brought up versus tribulation. And we'll see this here. So we read a very similar passage in Mark chapter 13. Look in Luke 21:25. We have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, synoptic gospels that kind of parallel each other. And we have a very similar statement there starting in verse 25.
There will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth's distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and waves rolling.
Anguish and perplexity. Anguish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how this uses this.
Will be in anguish and perplexity.
Okay. Notice as we read verse 26 as it goes on.
Men's hearts failing them for fear and looking for those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken.
So we have that idea here of the same thing we looked at in the Old Testament is being repeated here in the Gospels. So we have it 4 times in the Old Testament, and we have it 4 times in the New Testament, one by each one of the gospel writers. And then John uses it in the book of Revelation. So we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke bring this up, and then John, he doesn't necessarily put it in the gospel, but he puts it in the book of Revelation, which I think is interesting. You got 4 and 4 there. Okay. So this idea of tribulation, why is it important that the word tribulation is used instead of the word distress? Well, back in Matthew chapter 29, when it says there in verse 21, let's have somebody read that again. Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. I think I made a mistake and said 29. Matthew 24:21.
For then there will be great time, not ever so.
What is this great tribulation that's talked about here?
I'm glad you explained that.
Is this the time period right before the second coming when all the God's people are being persecuted?
Or it is 74 days. 12/6, right?
538 to 1798. The Great Tribulation is the 1260 years. Those are the horrible persecution toward God's people that have taken place during this period of time. But what does Jesus say about this Great Tribulation? Verse 22 of Matthew 24.
Except those days should be shortened, that there should be no flesh be saved. For the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened.
Did you notice in the Old Testament, the first thing that appears is earthquake? And it's the same thing with the seal, in the 6th seal. So when we go back to Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, what does it say there? Let's read that again, get it back in our minds.
And I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was great earthquake, and the sun became black as a sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood.
All right. So this great earthquake, the Bible talks about not only there, but also in the Old Testament, is referring to the Lisbon earthquake in 1755. And what's interesting about this is, you notice Matthew chapter 24 and verse 21 says this tribulation period will be cut short, right? And so even though we have that time period, we're going to have a time where it's cut short. And notice after this earthquake took place in 1755, we have persecution of the church dying off. Because this earthquake devastated large parts of Europe, Africa, and it was felt, halfway around the world. It was a massive earthquake that took place. And you remember how we read in Luke, how he talked about the sea? We also read that in the Old Testament. Well, when you have a massive earthquake like that, it impacts the sea, right? And you could read the newspaper articles that were written back then. You could Google this and read about this, the results of the Lisbon earthquake, how the sea was also, I mean, you have waves that were 60 feet high that was, like wiping out different cities and communities.
Wonderful. Pastor said,
Yeah,
it said it was especially hit Spain and Portugal.
right.
And that's where that,
Because that was the epicenter was there in Portugal.
that's 60-foot wave was in the country too.
That's right. And there were other countries that experienced that as well. So it was just massive devastation from this earthquake. And so the focus for people at that point in time, they were thinking that the world was coming to an end. They were just grateful that they were able to get up the next day if they survived. This happened November the 1st, 1755. And so the focus then wasn't persecuting Bible believing Christians. That it was more of survival. This is something that was out of the ordinary when it came to earthquakes. This Lisbon earthquake that took place in 1755. So as a result, after this, persecution started dying off against God's people. And that's what I think he's talking about here in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. This tribulation or persecution that was taking place against God's people by the church that was set up by Satan, it died off. So that's what I think it means by cut short there in Matthew chapter 24. So I think the word tribulation is a better word to use because we apply it to this 1260-year time period. This is the great tribulation.
So if Matthew 24:21 is then, it will be so great, never to be repeated again. I thought the greatest tribulation time was going to be at the end of the time here. Second time.
Well, I think in terms of it depends on how you quantify that, or because you could say how many people died during this period of time. Minimum. You could Google it. Minimum, they estimate minimum 50 million, but they're saying it could be as much as 150 million. So I mean, there was a
Will die again. It'll be worth thankfully or whatever for sure.
right. We're going to have persecution and martyrs all the way down to the close of our face, right? That's going to take place. But during this period of time, you had this effort used, the devil trying to stamp out Bible believing Christians and establish his own church as the true church, right? That's what he was trying to do during that period of time. And, good examples, that's the Spanish Inquisition, right? I don't think it's any coincidence that this happened in Lisbon, right? Portugal's right next to Spain as part of the Spanish peninsula there of Europe. And this was the slave trading capital of the world at the time, right?
Okay, you just answered part of what, part of my, I was thinking that that verse was geared towards the tribulation to come before Jesus' return.
Right. And that's what dispensationalists want us to believe, right? They try to take this great tribulation here. They try to apply that to a 7-year tribulation time period in the future. And the amazing thing about this, I don't want to use the word amazing, but I can't think of a better word. I mean, it was pretty ingenious of the devil to come up with this idea of the 7-year tribulation that you never reach, that you never get to it. It's always in the future. I mean, the second coming could be happening, and the people could be saying, "Oh, well, the tribulation is still in the future."
You're not in a hurry.
You never get to it. Right? And that's the ingenious part about this. He set up this teaching that you have you have nothing to tell you that it's taking place, right?
Procrastinate.
Yeah, it's always in the future, Tom.
That's the way I was raised, and pretty much the entire book of Revelation, you didn't look at it, because it's without scripture.
And we're not gonna be here anyway.
Yeah, and it was such a revelation, maybe that's for going to school. Well, that, all of this is happening the minute he starts, the minute Jesus leaves, everything starts.
It starts to happen, right? The book of Revelation is about the history of the church all the way down to the second coming, right? We don't have the microphone, do we? Okay, all right. I just want to make sure Steve's able to hear because he is listening. I did see his face every now and then, but I wanted to make sure he's able to hear.
Yes,
somebody
I hear.
else- Okay,
Yes, I
great.
hear.
Good. Yeah.
So it's really, what is it that was saying like the times of Sodom and Gomorrah is more geared towards the end? I'm just trying.
Okay. Well, notice that's one of the signs that we're at the end of time. Jesus brings this up. We get this if you look in Luke chapter 17. Let's see. He says, likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, right? They ate, they drank, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So he's telling us that our society is going to be like the society of Sodom and Gomorrah before the second coming takes place. That our society is going to degrade and be like Sodom and Gomorrah. And we see that happen. I mean, I make that statement, I don't know, maybe once a week when I see stuff on the radio or the television and you'll hear stuff or see stuff. I say, we're living in Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, that's the bottom line. We're there today, Thomas.
The Bible describes Sodom and Gomorrah as filled with, prostitutes and homosexuals and all that. Look at today. Doesn't that describe what's going on right now?
I mean, Jesus hit the nail on the head, didn't he? He said,
You showed just a little bit ago.
that's just part of it, isn't it? Yeah. So I think he was telling us there that the culture is going to accept this type of lifestyle that is against the Bible and is harmful to humanity. It's going to accept that as the norm. And then we know that the second coming soon. That's that's why I think, wow, we're really close because our culture has embraced this alternative lifestyle, right? That includes, she was talking about in the video how they were, I've got to be careful my wording here, damaging children physically. While in our world, in our culture today, it's almost like you're a bad person if you don't allow the parents to damage their children physically in our country today. It's horrible.
The labor pains have started.
Yeah, it's horrible what's taking place to the children. They had some adults who had gone through this from their parents. Now they've grown up and they were testifying before Congress about how it's impacted them in a negative way in their lives. And I wish people would see that before they force these things on the children.
Then there's abortion.
Exactly. So we see we're living in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Our culture has degraded so far. I don't see how it can go any farther. I think we're at the bottom, right? That's why I think that's another reason why I think the second coming soon. Like, I like watching the old Andy Griffith programs from the 60s. It was got a good message, it was humorous, it was, very entertaining for me. I know from some of the young kids today it wouldn't be entertaining, but especially the way Don Knotts plays Barney Fife. But the thing about it is they portray life back then as we go to church, we sing hymns, they had the standard of right, wrong, and even from, I mean, that was television in the 60s, right? And now you look at television today, and it's like, I mean, how many God's name in vains did they have in the Barbie movie? Right? We looked it up on Plugged In. We didn't go see the movie. Five.
Find what?
God's name in vain. Why would you say God's name in vain in a children's movie? Right? I don't think it's a children's movie. I think it's, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I know it. I'm saying, why do they force this stuff on us,
It's always been a program you want to watch.
Right.
There in the middle.
That goes to show, I mean, even if it's a movie for children, you got to go to Plugged In and look to see what they do a review of the movies, how many times God's name is said in vain, sexual violence. They list all that out so you can see before you go, see the movie. And I recommend if you're not go thinking about seeing a movie, go look it up on Plugged In and see what they say about it. Because I can't stand to hear God's name in vain. It doesn't add anything to the movie. It's only there to corrupt us, to plant ideas in our minds. And I say, reject it, right? Tom?
They've got a blog of preachers in sneakers. And guy points out, he keeps a track of all these preachers down at the arena wear $1,000 tennis shirt, things like that. And he talks about the focus is moving away from Jesus. And we've had it with while, but it's interesting how they get silver.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's amazing how some of these guys live. I mean, if I was a church member, I'd be raising a red flag and saying, "No, wait a second, what's going on here?" Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Debbie? Yes.
There's verses that say basically the same thing about abomination of desolation. It's in Matthew 24:15 and Mark 13:14. What does that mean?
And it's in Daniel chapter 11.
Well, they refer to Daniel, but
Right.
what is that pertaining to?
Okay. Jesus tells us that there are multiple abominations of desolation, okay? But they parallel each other. So let's look at the one that Jesus talked about, and we'll read it, and then you tell me what it is, okay? Because I think you'll see it. I think it's pretty clear there.
From now?
No, we're gonna read it out of Luke here. You remember the verse in Luke that has the abomination of desolation in it? 21:20. So I'm here in it says now. So listen to the way it's worded, Debbie. Ready? Because I think this will answer for you. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Right? So what happened? The first abomination of desolation that Jesus is referring to here is the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So what they did was they had these standards. So they considered Jerusalem, the Jews did, a holy city. So when the Romans came with their standards of idolatry or worshiping false gods, they took and planted these standards in the ground. They call that the abomination of desolation because essentially what ultimately happened was the Romans desolated. They destroyed the temple. It was totally obliterated in 70 AD. So that's what Jesus is talking about. So that's the first abomination of desolation is the destruction of the temple. So shouldn't we see that the second abomination of desolation is more of a spiritual impact about how the Romans, in other words, what did the Roman Empire morph into? The papacy. And what was their purpose? Daniel chapter 8.
To deceive the people.
About the heavenly sanctuary. You see the parallel? So the physical Romans destroyed physically the temple, right? Abomination of desolation, right? And then the Bible predicted about the rise of the next Roman state, the papacy, right? Which would try to obliterate the idea of the heavenly sanctuary, which includes the Ten Commandments. And with the heart of the Ten Commandments is the seventh day Sabbath. So All right. Any other questions? Because I'm trying to remember where I'm at.
Revelation 6:12 and 13.
Okay. So the great earthquake here in Lisbon, you can see from a historical data, just look at the data there, that the persecutions dropped off and that wasn't their focus anymore. Just like Jesus said that in the great tribulation, these persecutions would end sooner. That's my paraphrase. Okay, so we use Matthew 24:21 on that. So we have the great earthquake taking place in 1755. What's next in Revelation chapter 6 after the great earthquake?
Sunlight.
All right, isn't that the same thing that happened when we read in Joel, or we read in the other Old Testament? It follows the same pattern. We have the earthquake, we have the sun being blackened, and we call this the great dark day, which happened in 1780. You could Google the Great Dark Day, and you could read the newspaper articles about what happened in 1780. Okay, anybody Googling that right fast? You can see some of the things that pop up. So the dark day, what happened is in the middle of the day, the sun went black. What's amazing about this is we've had situations to where the sun goes dark. What's it called?
Eclipse.
Yeah, when you have an eclipse, and it's pretty amazing. You can't look at the sun, you gotta have special glasses, right?
Mount St. Helens,
Yeah.
everything was black.
Yeah, so you could, and that's what people try to say. Oh, you must have had you must have had a volcano explode or something on this day. Well, the interesting thing about that is it covered a huge amount of area, a lot larger area than what we have like with Mount St. Helens, right? Whenever that exploded. And so there was no natural phenomenon that explained this dark day. And the people who lived through it realized this was supernatural. It went dark in the middle of the day, and it wasn't just for a few seconds like an eclipse, right? There wasn't some big cloud in the sky like a volcano blew up. It went dark, and they thought this was the end of the world.
They said the darkness was oppressive.
They could feel it. Yeah. They could feel the darkness, right? Read the newspaper articles. You can see, get the firsthand report on these. Don't take my word for it. The animals thought it was nighttime and time to go back to the barn. So they turned around from the field and went back to the barn. I mean, people left their occupations and they thought, wow, this is the end of the world. It was a very traumatic experience this dark day. Well, guess what? What's the next thing that happens in Revelation?
Red moon.
The moon turned bloody at midnight.
Yeah. So this lasted for about 12 hours, and then there's a clear sky. That's another reason why it's not a volcano that explodes, because you wouldn't have a clear sky all of a sudden. And what did they see? What they see?
They saw the moon,
They saw the moon that turned the color of blood, just like the Bible said was going to happen. And they're like, wow.
Pastor, was this over? It was over New England, but how far did it didn't extend over the whole United States?
I don't know exactly what area. New England was the ones where you get the newspapers, right? I mean, in the late 1700s, it was the northeast part of the United States where you had the newspapers being printed, and you had people that were literate, that were able to read these things. So we don't really know, as you look at as you go west, the population's a lot less sparse, right? I mean, we just didn't have the technology then to know really how far it went. It could have covered the whole United States. I don't know, but it's very prevalent in the northeast part because that's where you had the newspapers and people were writing about it. So I don't know how big it was, to be honest, but it was so radical that people recognized, wow. And we believe it was fulfillment of prophecy in Revelation chapter 6 and verses 12 and 13. Somebody had their hand up? Oh, Lori?
just reading through some of these dark days of 1780, and I went from the ones that were written, like there's articles written from like the early 2000s up to most recent. They're saying that it was from a wildfire, that the international researched this and found out it was big fires, wasn't really any kind of supernatural
Yeah, but when you read the newspaper articles of the people who lived through it, they don't talk about smoke. They don't talk about wildfires. They just talk about how this eerie darkness that was oppressive, that you could feel, that took place for no reason. If you read the newspaper articles from the people who lived it back then, you could see it wasn't something that was because of some natural phenomenon. Because if it was wildfires, here's what I noticed. We had these wildfires in Canada, right? And we've had some of the smoke come even here to Tennessee. And just because it goes from daytime to nighttime doesn't mean all of a sudden the smoke clears away. How did they see the moon if there was smoke, right? It doesn't just all of a sudden clear away, right? So we're talking about supernatural phenomenon. We're not talking about something that took place as a result of something natural or man-made, right?
Makes you think about when Christ died and how it went. Did they attribute it to him? They were like thinking the end of the world.
They were frightened. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Says, next verse, is that part of the tribulation too?
Well, read it and see what you're
It
talking.
says, and the stars of heaven fell upon the earth, even the fig tree cast her in the time of figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. Is that part of the tribulation?
Okay, no, it's not part of the tribulation. It's talking about a physical event. Remember, we said the sixth seal isn't symbolic. And here's how we know that too. Right? Notice what you just read. You said the stars fell as what?
Fig tree.
Right? So it's using a symbol to give you an understanding of a physical event taking place, right? The Bible doesn't use a symbol to describe a symbol. You see that? It uses a symbol as figs falling from tree to describe something of a literal event. And so that took place, the stars falling.
1833.
November 1833.
That's what I was getting to. You said the tribulation period ended there, 1798.
Right.
I believe it goes up to the time of Christ.
Well, definitely. We're talking about this period. We definitely have tribulation all the way to the close of probation. Because after the close of probation, there's no more need for us to be martyred or Christians to be hurt. I mean, God protects them in a miraculous way. So we definitely have tribulation all the way. Corrie ten Boom, who went through the horrible atrocities of a concentration camp in the 1940s during World War II, said only in America would they think they're not going through tribulation. So we have tribulation, but this event, the Great Tribulation, is what I'm referring to in that time period, not tribulation in general. Okay. So the stars falling that took place in November of 1833, and you can read the accounts from people who lived through that too. I mean, some of you might be Googling it right now. You ought to read what Abraham Lincoln said about it. People thought it was the end of the world. Again, Scott.
When I lived in Alabama in the early 2000s, my license plate was stars fell on Alabama. It had stars on it. And I looked it up and it was referring back to the 1833 event.
It is interesting how it made such an impact. It made it all the way to the 20th century on a license plate for a car, right?
It actually turned into a jazz song that somebody wrote in 1934, and then that was kind of the lyrics that got onto the license. But it was about that event.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Songs.
And here's the amazing thing too. When I grew up going to these different churches right before I became a Seventh-day Adventist, I never heard any of this. No, not at all. Right? And it is so interesting to me to see how the Bible has come true in every aspect here. Right? And what I think is also interesting about this is these three events, right? the earthquake, the dark day, and the stars falling, it all had to take place before the pre-Advent judgment began in 1844.
So it was 11 years before that.
Right.
That makes you wonder what William Miller thought about it.
You know, William Miller, it was about this time period when he started really proclaiming publicly, right, about the prophecies in the book of Daniel. And then you had this huge awakening taking place in the northeast part of the United States as a result of William Miller, but you had in other parts of the world too, right? And because of William Miller's ministry that started about the time of the stars falling, we had this Advent awakening where people understood that Jesus' second coming was literal and that it was going to take place soon. That wasn't a normal teaching in churches back then. That's the other surprising thing. When you say that to people, because they think, now, oh yeah, Jesus is coming again soon. Of course, their coming of it is not the same as our understanding of the coming, right? They think secret rapture, they think touch the earth and set up a millennial reign of peace. All that is stuff that came into the church after 1850. Okay, the churches before 1850, they had different ideas about the second coming of Jesus. When you were born again and became a converted Christian, that's the second coming of Jesus. Or we're already living in the millennium. You know, they had those type of teachings. They didn't understand about the literal second coming of Jesus. It was a literal event that was going to take place soon. So when William Miller stood up, this Baptist preacher, right, started telling people there's going to be a literal second coming of Jesus. We got to get ready. You know, that's essentially his message. People from all different denominations were studying the Bible and listening, going and listening to him proclaim these great prophecies from the book of Daniel. They said, wow, Jesus is coming again soon, literally. And they were kicked out of their churches because of that. Right?
Eventually.
Yeah. At first. So notice, you know, people talk about, I got to close up here. People talk about, you know, the different churches and why different denominations. The interesting thing about this is God, he shares these truths in a certain denomination that God raised up, latched onto these truths and said, yeah, this is good. But then they stopped. It didn't go forward with the truth. They just stopped where they were at. Like the Baptists, recognizing that you're saved by grace through faith and that baptism is important, complete immersion. They didn't take that truth to the next step. The Methodists come along and say, well, you got to have holy living. There's no such thing as once saved, always saved, you know, but they didn't take it to the next step. So here the Methodist Church, whenever Ellen White's family, this was as she was a teenager, accepted these truths, they were disfellowshipped from the Methodist Church because they believed in the literal second coming of Jesus. And when you tell that now to a Methodist, you know, you talk about the beginnings of the Adventist. Oh, yeah, the Adventist Church came out of the Methodist Church. What? Yeah, because they believed in a literal second coming of Jesus, and the Methodists back then didn't believe that. They're like, what?
Pastor, the truth was that they came out of all the churches, right?
They did. But I'm looking at the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you know, James and Ellen White. Ellen White came out of the Methodist Church. No, he was Baptist. Yeah. So I think that's interesting. We'll have to finish the sixth seal next time, hopefully. And we're also hoping that Steve's going to be with us then. We be praying for Steve. We want to encourage him and let him know that we miss him today. Hopefully he'll be in a room pretty soon, right?
Hopefully today.
Yeah, he's been in the ER since last night, right? And we're hoping to be in the room soon. Father in heaven, we thank you for these great truths in the word of God. And we just want to lift up Steve, pray for healing for him, ask that he gets in a room soon. And we just pray he gets the rest and the medical help he needs in order to have healing. Please touch him today on your Sabbath. In Jesus' name, thank you. Thanks for coming.